Welcome back to the Sweet Hometowns podcast. Today, we're going to catch the second part of the interview with Mary Means. And if you haven't had a chance, make sure you go back and listen to the first part so that this all fits together for you.
All right. So again, welcome back to the Sweet Hometowns podcast. We are having our second part of the Mary Means interview. She is the mother of Main Street, and we're very excited to have her on board. But there may be a few things that you need to know before we get into the second half of this particular interview with Mary.
So one of the things that I was a little bit confused about when I first started with Main Street were the 4 points. And so for those of them out here listening that may not understand or they've listened to a couple podcasts, let's delve into a little bit more of that. And then I know Mary's going to cover this in hers, but talk a little bit for us about how they were developed, just so we have a little sense of grounding before she gets started.
Sure. In my conversation with Mary, which you get to hear the second half of here shortly, she did talk about how they were talking about courthouses and preservation, which falls into design, but they realized rather quickly it's about economic development. It's about how do we get people excited to come back into the district, which is promotion. And most of all, we got to get some organization around this. So as a reminder, the 4 points are organization, and organization is really getting people singing out of the same songbook. Is this important to you? And how do we want to gather people who love the community back in to make it better? The second of the 4 points is promotion. And promotion really is inviting people back into the district, whether it's to eat, work, play, live, and hopefully invest. One of the cool things that you can do, what I really love about these districts is everybody has a spot here. I mean, these downtown districts are for everybody. And I really like that. People feeling like they have an ownership in it. I think that's very cool. Design is the piece that probably started this whole evolution here because of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and that was how do we save these historic buildings? How do we work on things that were meant to last a century or two or four, whatever we might be getting to on some of these buildings. It's very important stuff. And then the last of these is economic vitality, and economic vitality is everything else. I mean, it's understanding how small businesses work, understanding how to market, understanding what brings people into the district is those business owners and the services and products that they offer. So that's where the 4 points came from.
And I guess the other question, I know Mary's going to talk a little bit about it, but kind of how are they developed? Just quickly. Like, I know Mary's going to go deep into it, but just a little overview.
Well, like I said, I think they got into the 3 communities, Galesburg, Illinois, Hot Springs, South Dakota, and Madison, Indiana, and determined rather quickly that preservation by itself wasn't going to move the needle the way they wanted to move the needle. So you really had to figure out. Now, how they named them, that's the Mary Means question. But the really neat thing for me is after those 3 years, and of course I was not even remotely thinking about Main Street in 1977, trust me. I was doing many other things at that time. I was a kid. The trust tested a state partner model after that, where state coordinators, and that's what we do here in Alabama, we're a state coordinating program, took that 4-point approach and tailored it to the individual communities. So I think the point maybe that you're getting at is design the same in every community? No.
Yeah.
It really, you meet the community where they're at, you meet them where they need to go in the future. So we've talked to different Main Street directors now, and they did not start, buying property and figuring out how to move things forward.
Right.
They start way simpler than that.
But I think that's why it works, right?
Yeah.
Because you meet everybody where they're at. You don't expect them to meet you.
Yeah. So the 4-point approach is not you do this today and you do this tomorrow and you do this on Thursday and you'll be successful. It really is figuring out what do we need in design. And design may not be about buildings for a particular community. It may be more about how do we, it may be about window displays. It may be about how can we just pull the weeds and clean this up. It is about everything that's visual that falls within that. And then promotion, like I said earlier, is just, how do you invite people back into the district. And it should be the living room of a community. And I say that a lot. When you think about, you invite people over to your house. My house is more the kitchen than the living room, but that's the place. The places in your home that you're going to have people gather. That's what your districts are.
It's the ones you clean before people come over.
It is. You need to clean them, and they need to be spruced up, and they need to look pretty, and you want to make sure the lights are on, and you want all of those things. And it really does relate well to your downtown or neighborhood commercial district being the living room of your city.
I love that.
So it's a model that started nearly 50 years ago, and it's still working today. So they clearly happened upon something with a lot of research and 3 years of really hard work that is still successful almost 50 years later.
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm excited to listen to the second half of this interview.
She is just a ball of fire, so let's hear more from Mary Means.
It's so exciting. So can you tell me how you settled on the 4-point approach, how you came up with those 4 points?
Well, there were the 3 original Main Street managers, Tom Moriarty, Scott Gerloff, and Clark Shuttle. We lost Tom, who died late last summer, and we were all at a celebration of Tom's life this last weekend. Needless to say, anyone who knew Tom Moriarty kind of knew what, if he was allowed to plan his own celebration of life, what that would be like. It was in a tavern. It was a large party. But Clark and Scott and I were just kind of reminiscing about this, and Clark pointed out something I had skipped by me. When we were going to do our first conference from the 3 towns, it was time to do the first conference. We really didn't have enough accomplished in these 3 towns to come in and say, here's the whole, how it's working. But we realized that if we went by topic, we had enough examples across the 3 towns to actually be able to flesh out something and present in terms of what we were talking about with economic development or design improvements and that kind of thing. But even like around that same time, we're going, this is going to wind up in a year, and we're going to need to be able to capture it, what we've been doing, in a way that is easy for people to grasp. Because if we get into great detail and with lots of rules and everything, it's not going to work. Here's 3 things you can do to improve your health or whatever. Of course, none of us do any of them, but we spent a weekend just brainstorming and wallpapering a huge room with sheets of paper trying to capture everything we'd learned. And then we kept condensing it down, and we finally realized that we had what amounted to 4 buckets of activity. You can't just concentrate on one of those because you really like economic development and you think doing special events that's girls' work. So, but the important thing was, here are the 4 categories of activity and where you need to spend time, and you have to do them all together. You can't just choose one for the first year and then choose another. They all have to be in synergy. And that became the 4 points. It was organization. You can't get anything done by yourself, so you have to have an organization of some kind. It might exist, or you might need to form one, or you might need to overthrow one that's not, help one change to become more effective. But you have to have organization. And then at the time, because people had stopped coming to downtowns, they were going to the mall or whatever, you needed to have some promotion or publicity to bring people back downtown, to give them a reason to be there. So there was promotion. And that's the whole place, not just promoting a business or a sidewalk sale. And the third one was there needed to be great attention to how everything looked, the appearance of it, design. And you might think that meant restoring the buildings. Design is everything the eye could see downtown, because all of it forms an impression. It can be a beautifully restored building, but if the store window is chock-a-block with dust and dead flies and poor displays, it's not going to work. So paying attention to the design part of it was critically important. And then the fourth one was like economic vitality. The town was never going to be the center of its market again. And this is long before Amazon. because that just blew the wheels off of market right there. So what you're going to need to do was figure out what the town could succeed at that could work in the downtown. And it was probably going to be a mix of things, including residential, having more people living in the downtown in the upper stories or nearby within walking distance. So those four, organization, promotion, design, and economic vitality, became the pillars, the 4 points of what's still known as the Main Street approach. And it still works.
It absolutely works. So you had mentioned earlier about how you started with courthouses first, but churches, and I know that you and I have had more in-depth discussions on churches, but I'm giving you a platform. Let's talk a little bit about churches.
A pulpit, just what I've wanted.
Pulpit just for you.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's funny because people are noticing, I think, that there's been a great fall off in participation in organized religion, particularly among the mainstream denominations. It's been going on for a long time, because I can tell you that in the 70s, I'm not kidding when I said it was so bad we were losing so many fine church buildings, particularly in cities, that it was like, we got to do something about this. Of course, we didn't get to it because Main Street just wouldn't let go. But lately, I've become more than interested in it because I've become very active in my own church, trying to keep it from falling off the cliff financially and in terms of attendance. And here's the thing. There's been such a fall off of attendance at church, membership in church, participation in religion, that you may have beautiful buildings and you may drive by them or walk by them and think that's really beautiful. I'll bet it's a strong congregation. And there might be 80 people who are members, and none of them are under 60. And you talk about the financial contributions that they make are not enough to keep the roof on, so that it's looking good maybe from the outside. I think in the South, you'll see a lot of the church buildings are near or in the downtown, and they are part of the skyline, the snapshot of what the downtown is. Now imagine if a couple of those have to close. Some of them don't have ministers anymore. They share a minister. It does not matter what denomination it is. I'm not going to try tackling how do we bring the people back to go to church. That's a different thing altogether. This is what are we going to do with those buildings? That in the 70s and 80s, the white elephant was the department store that crashed and was there vacant. That was hard enough to deal with. This is 10 times harder because the buildings are more complicated. The decision processes are a snarled nightmare of getting a congregation to agree on anything takes years. So I've really been pushing for people to understand that it's time for us to pay a lot more attention to the fate of the buildings that have been housing not just an essential community service. And I'm not meaning the religious and spiritual side of it. That's vital, of course. But so many of these are providing food banks and clothing banks and social services and youth programs and senior programs that I don't think even local governments have an idea of how much in the way of social service is being provided here that is not going to be able to be done, or it's going to vanish unless something happens that we all get together and figure out what to do about the shrinking church as an active institution in a community.
I think it's a really good point. You know, I traveled the whole state, of course, as the state coordinator, but I'm in Birmingham today, so I can't imagine the street line, the whole city line without the churches that are here. I just, and I think if people look at it that way, and just imagine that building is no longer there, how it's going to change your whole landscape. Is a really interesting way of putting it. Maybe that will drive some points home. But
well, to me, one of the things I noticed, first of all, about the courthouse situation was, particularly in smaller communities, the courthouse in the Midwest, at least, was often in a square itself. I mean, there was green all around, and then there was the courthouse, and then the town was stretched around it. is that it was kind of like the building itself was like an anchor, like a big paperweight that kind of kept the town from blowing apart. And the places that I'd gone to, that they'd torn that building down to build a one out on the highway somewhere where there was plenty of parking. Um, it was just like something had happened. It was like it had vanished. There was nothing there. And I think if you think about the role that these buildings play in terms of anchoring a downtown, we have to find functions for them and activities for them that let them continue to anchor a community.
I think one of the funnest things I did as a local director is we did a tour with the fifth graders. We had a building that had just housed fifth graders for Preservation Month. And we would, take the kids, and it was May.
Yeah.
And we'd have 300 plus kids, we'd have to split them into different groups. But as we're walking through the district, we could tell the story. And I think it's important to note is you can tell just by walking through your historic district, you can tell when your community was really going
Yeah.
well. And you can also tell when it struggled a little bit just by looking at the buildings and when they were built. But you can also tell the love that people had for their community because they put their names on buildings. They meant these to last. So
Pride. It was great community pride, right?
To talk about, honoring the people who founded the place and wanted to put their names on it. This wasn't meant to be, a 5-year building that we're going to tear down and build something bigger. This was meant to be here forever if it's taken care of. So to me, that's Main Street.
Yeah.
I'm just so happy that we're getting close to 50 years, and you have to be so very proud of what you're seeing. But can you tell me one thing that you're most proud of, or 2 or 3 things that you're most proud of?
Well, it's interesting when we first started out with all of this, the preservation movement and the National Trust were over here, and we were trying to do something different. What we were trying to do was preservation, but we were approaching it obliquely. We weren't kind of leading with, you have to have a historic district. In fact, I can remember the chief counsel at the National Trust at the time, when he heard the 3 towns we were selecting, went, "Mary, we can come into Madison and get them a historic district ordinance immediately." And I just went, "Stop right there. You are from New York and you worked on the Grand Central case. And in New York, no one knows their mortgage banker, right? But in a small town, everyone does.
That's true.
And you don't understand the dynamic. If you come in there and start leading with regulation and people telling you what you're going to do, this will end. So please, Frank, stay out of these towns for a while." I think what I'm kind of proudest of is, for the longest, the National Trust did not really think that what we were doing, they scratched heads. What is this? You people are doing, yard sales and farmers markets and all of this kind of thing. And it's not really preservation, And we were kind of going, well, it's keeping the town alive. At any rate, in 2020, during the summer of the pandemic, I got a phone call from the president of the National Trust. And Paul said, "I'm calling to tell you that the awards jury is giving you the Crown and Shield Award, the highest honor in historic preservation this year." And in fact, he said the jury kind of thought you already had it years ago. My first reaction was, well, I guess this acknowledges the National Trust is finally acknowledging that Main Street is historic preservation. And to me, the thing I'm proudest of is that not only did it stay going and snowball and affect so many people's lives, but that it's become an accepted thing in the preservation movement, something that touches people's hearts and emotion. It's essential if we're going to get beyond just the window muntins and the cornices that very few people can get excited about. Having mainstreamed historic preservation, I think, is the thing I'm most proud of.
And that's near and dear to my heart, because it is sometimes, people don't necessarily think of Main Street as even economic development or historic preservation. We're a lot more than the After Crown Planning Committee. We do so much more than events and activities.
I want to raise an issue because you've got so many towns in Alabama, and there's so many elsewhere that they've been in the program for a good while now. And there are probably people in the town that are new or they're younger or whatever, and they have no idea what it was like to start with. And they just kind of think it's always been this wonderful, this cute, all that. One of the key things that we did at the outset as we were trying to figure out what are we going to do in these three towns was we knew we were going to try to demonstrate something. We were trying to demonstrate that preservation could work as an underpinning for economic vitality. So we knew we'd have to have proof. So we photographed every building in the downtowns. So we'd have the before pictures. Because we knew we were going to have afters. We might not have had many, but we were going to have some. And the other thing we did was decide that we were going to really need to track the economic performance. Because I can't tell you how many times a business person in a downtown, when I was, eager about preservation and doing something with their buildings, would say, is that going to bring customers? What's it going to do to my bottom line? So we're going to have to answer that question. So we came up with a fairly simple set of measurements that could be tracked easily. So right now, Main Street America has the largest collection of economic information about the economic activities in its communities. But I'm saying this because I've learned not too long ago that people have stopped taking those before and after pictures.
Oh, no.
And it is really hard to make a case with people who have no idea what you started with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm encouraging anyone who's listening to this to go and find the early pictures. Just keep taking some with the changes. It might not seem like much now, but in 5 to 10 years, you're going to be amazed at how much difference it's really going to make.
We went back and looked a lot of old Christmas parade photos, and what we found was they were taken primarily from one side of the street. So we had great block shots on one side, and like, why were we? Because that's where the parade stand was at. So everybody was always on that side. So okay, we got buildings on the other side too. But yes, historic photos. I think if you put a call out for it, a lot of times you'll get photos that you wouldn't have received otherwise if you just put a call out for it. People have pictures. May not be what you want, but
Aaron Barnes at Main Street America and I were talking not long ago because the 50th anniversary is coming up in a few years. And I was suggesting that it's a good time to put the word out to the whole Main Street universe. Send us your before and after pictures so that we can create, a montage nationally to visibly show the impact that the program has had. She loved it. So everybody out there should start keeping those photographs handy to digitize and get off to Main Street America.
It's been an honor to have you on the podcast. We really do appreciate you taking the time with us today, and can't wait to have you hear this episode, and can't wait to see you in Tulsa coming up in April for the next Wings With Now conference.
Will definitely see me in Tulsa. I'm really looking forward to it. So
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been great having a coffee with you this morning.
We were so thrilled to have a little bit of Mary Means' time. She's in high demand, as you can imagine, and is just a wonderful person. Is so excited that she gave us some of her time and told us more of her story. She's a very, very interesting lady with some great ideas, and is still looking at how do we deal with churches, which is part of a little bit of what she talked about in the second part of the interview. Is like, where do we move now on churches that are no longer a church home? So it's very interesting. She's not slowing down. She still has a lot to say and to work on and to do, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll pique more of your interest into what happens in Main Street communities. Thank you for being with us today.
You can learn more about Main Street Alabama and the Sweet Hometowns Initiative at sweethometowns.com, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram for updates and episode highlights.
The Sweet Hometowns podcast is a production of Main Street Alabama in partnership with Video Visions Media Marketing.